Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Truma is Perek Zayin Halacha Aleph. We're learning today Daf Samach Dalid, Daf Soid. We left off on Samach Dalid, Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the top of the Amud by the dot, Vekama the Tamar. And let's quickly review over here 2 arguments that we'll need for today's stuff. First of all, there is a machlokes between Rav Meir and the Chachamim. The ground zero of the machlokes is regarding Eidim Zoymimim. We know that whatever they conspire to do happens to them, which would mean that in a case where because of their false testimony, someone was found guilty to pay money that they did not really owe, when the Eidim are discovered to be conspiring witnesses, we punish them by them having to pay that money. The Torah also writes in the Aseres Hadibros that loisana bereyacha eit shaker, that one is not allowed to bear false testimony, which is a thou shall not. Even though you can argue it's a lav she'ein by maisa, it's considered a lav she'yesh by maisa, akimas, sfasav hava maisa, etc. Rab Meir holds that Eidim Zoymimim will get malchus, and they'll have to give the financial money. The Chachamim are the ones that say, they speak about Eidim Zoymimim, but it's a rule throughout, that because of the concept that we call kam lei b'derabba minei, ein aloika u'mishalim. And what happens by Eidim Zoymimim, according to everyone, they pay the money and they don't give and they don't get malchus. Throughout the rest of Shas, we learned yesterday and 2 days ago that even though Rab Nassan Bar Hoshaya holds, that whenever you have a violation for which you chayiv malchus and chayiv money, you're not going to get both. Rab Nassan says you always will be chayiv the money. And according to him, our sugya fits a person who eats truma. The Torah says, Zor lo yoichal boy. A Zor, a non-kohen, is not allowed to eat truma, which means theoretically that eating truma is a lav for which you should get malchus. Nevertheless, the Torah writes explicitly, let's speak about the case of the last chapter, that if a Zor eats truma, kodesh, bishgaga, they have to pay keren v'choimish. So now the problem will be, how does that work? Oh, well, according to Rab Nassan bar Rabbi Shaya, it's perfect. Why is it perfect? You pay money, you don't get malchus. However, according to Rabbi Yochanan and according to Resh Lakish, they are the ones that hold that ein aloika u'mishalem, but you get malchus. Here also we have the following. According to Rabbi Yochanan, when do you not get both? When you're going to get both. So you don't. When you get malchus, you don't have to pay the money. But when you don't get malchus because you ate truma b'shoigig, then you have to pay the money. It means according to Rabbi Yochanan, there's also no issue. The challenge will be l'shitas Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish holds that chayave malchus, even shoigigin, are also exempt from payment. The Mishnah, he explained, follows Rabbi Meir. But what do you do with the pasuk? That was the issue. The Torah says that if someone eats truma b'shoigig, you pay keren v'choimish. So we had a very innovative answer yesterday, and I perhaps misspoke on a nuance which I should correct. And if I said it correct, it's zoichet good. Regarding the choimish, I'm using the words of the Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan says that the choimish is like a korban. And therefore, as we learned, the rule of kam lei b'derabba minei is only when both punishments are masur lebezdin. But any punishment that's masur lashomayim, and we already established that a korban is considered the punishment that's between man and God, therefore, you get malchus and you pay a korban. So even though you're not getting malchus de facto because you ate truma b'shoigig, but the chayave malchus, even b'shoigigin, doesn't exempt you from the choimish. Why? Because the choimish is kapara. So the Gemara says, okay, very good with the choimish. What about the keren? By keren, the Gemara says, keren is a knas. How is keren knas? You're giving financial restitution is not a knas. It is a knas. And the Gemara gave 2 proofs. That's where we left off. Proof number 1 is because the guy ate truma. Truma has less value. And you have to pay back dafke chulin misukanim. Even more, it's not a different proof, but even a greater proof, the fact that at least lechatchila, if a person ate truma, that's temeya. That only has the value of fuel. The may eats him. Even there, lechatchila, you have to pay back chulin misukanim. So the difference between the keren value and what you did, it's not the same. It's not financial restitution. It's kanas. Now, 2 things have to. That's where we're up. 2 things have to be pointed out. One is, if that's the logic, if you're classifying keren as kanas, you should classify the choimish as kanas as well. not only kapara. Why do I care whether it's called knas or kapara? That will be the problem. The problem will be is that we will see that the law that ein loika u'mishalem also refers to knas. You're right, loika carbon that we have. So if chaimish is only viewed as kapara carbon, we can farenfer, yeah. It's a problem that bears the penalty of malchus, even though you're not getting it. According to Resh Lakish, I don't care that you're not getting it. But malchus, sin of malchus, and carbon, that we tolerate together. Chaimish should also be viewed as a knas. And independent, keren is only a knas. Keren is not kapara, keren is a knas. And the problem again will be that according to Reish Lakish, the rule of Eino Loika U'Mishalem doesn't only apply to financial restitution, it applies to Aknas. And we're going to go back in a statement that I made by myself, and we're going to see that it's going to be Gavaldik. So we're going to have to resolve that. The Gemara, after resolving, which this will have to be resolved, after resolving all of this, the Gemara will give you exceptions, according to everyone, where one will be Loika U'Mishalem. One of the exceptions, for reasons that the Gemara will give, that we will have today, which is a Gavaldik. The Torah says, actually, in Parshas Kiseitze, right after the psukim that we were learning, Kedei Rishasoi, V'Kol Lefanav, Arboim Yakenu, right after the Torah speaks explicitly about Malchus, in the next verse, the Torah says, Loichsachsoim Shoir B'Dishoy, thou shalt not muzzle an ox. Rashi writes in Chumash, Diber HaKosov Boheva, doesn't only mean an ox. Any animal that you are using to thresh, the animal naturally, while it's threshing, at times would want to go and eat from that which it is threshing. The Torah says one is not allowed to muzzle the animal, which would prevent the animal from eating. That's actually the ground zero for many rules that you're over on alav, Yechayiv Malchus. How do you know Yechayiv Malchus? Because the Torah juxtaposes Arboim Yakenu and the next pasuk, and from there we learn when a Yechayiv Malchus, only if it's alav, shaloi nitek la'aseh, alav shaloi niten letashlumim, alav sheyesh boy maisa, whatever. And anyways, it's time to know that. Now, think about it. If a person rents someone else's animal, even though I'm paying you for rent, it's like today you rent a car. I'm paying for the rent a car. I have to also put gas in. The renter, is obligated during that time to feed the animal. That's the norm. If such a person uses this animal to thresh his produce and he muzzles the animal, first of all, he's violating a lav, right? He muzzled the animal. But then there's another issue. The issue is that he's going to be chayiv to give to the owner of the animal the amount of food that the animal would have eaten during the threshing had he not muzzled the animal. Unlike fuel in a car, you don't put in fuel, the car dies, right? By Hashem made us in a way that we are made to feast and we are made to fast. Person can fast. What happens when you fast? Your body consumes whatever it needs from what you stored in you. In other words, you didn't feed the animal is not going to die, the animal is going to thresh, but the animal is going to dip into its reservoir of energy, of fat, of whatever it has in its body. That is something that you owe the owner, so you have to pay him back. Malchus, financial restitution. That's going to be a case that we're going to focus a lot in. That's going to be basically the whole daf. I mean, why is that an exception? And we have the same sugi and the Bavli, Mamish, with a lot of differences. But let's hit it over here, Chaver. It's Gavaldik. So daf Samach Dalid, 4 lines from the top. Proving 2 reasons, it's really one extended proof that the keren is not financial because you're giving a lot more value than what you took, especially when you ate Truma Tamei. Problem is, asks the Gemara, that same logic, which classifies the keren as knas, ukmod the teimar keren knas, that same logic, emes, should be used to also classify the chaimish as a knas. Same thing, right, Aviv? The fact that I have to give back plus a fifth, I didn't eat a fifth, I ate the keren, not the chaimish. Now, what's the problem with that? So what's the problem? There are many different ways of learning this Gemara. We are learning this Gemara now to finish today's daf. I'm not going to read it inside, but there's a Pnei Moshe on daf Samach Gimel Amud Beis that says the following. And now I chap what I said yesterday. we had a contradiction. The whole thing was formulated in the Yerushalmi. This whole topic was not right away a question on our Mishnah. How did we open up this whole topic? That we have a stira between makis and ksubas. Remember that? In makis it says, Elein aloikin, one of the sins for which you chayv malchus is if a man, God forbid, he cohabits with a sister. In Masechta Ksubos, the Mishnah says that elu na'aris, that if a person violates them, they're chayiv to pay the knas of 50 shekel kesef, aside of the other punishments and penalties, is if a man violates his sister. So we had a problem. Right? How did Reish Lakish resolve the problem, Aviv? He said, that the Mishnah in Ksubos follows Rabbi Meir. According to the Chachamim, if a man violates his sister, God forbid, he won't have to pay any money. Why not? Because he's getting malchus. The Mishnah follows Rabbi Meir. That's what Reish Lakish says. Now I got a problem. What's the problem, Aviv? Why did Reish Lakish say that? If Reish Lakish would hold that the rule of Ein Aloika Umishalim only cuts out financial restitution, but we do give malchus and knas, which is what we're arguing. The 50 shekel kesef is knas. For sure it's knas. The Torah calls it a knas. He didn't take money from her. It's a penalty, amongst other penalties, for the horrible thing that this man did. The fact that Reish Lakish didn't answer that I have a simple solution to the stira, not that the Mishnah in Elonitis is Rav Meir, like the Gemara said yesterday, but the whole Mishnah is Rav Meir. I mean, we don't paskin like Rav Meir. Reish Lakish doesn't paskin like Rav Meir. We paskin ein aloika umishalim. He should have given the answer that we're speaking about a knas. Knas lives with malchus. Is a raya that Reish Lakish holds that the rule of ein aloika umishalim not only precludes the payment of financials, it also it doesn't allow for a payment of knas. So what are we back to the question of it? We're back to the bomb question. According to Reish Lakish, according to Rabbi Yechanan, there's no kasha. According to Nasan Bar Ishaya, there's for sure no kasha. If a person eats truma b'shoigig, they got to pay. According to the Rabbi Yechanan, if a person eats truma b'shoigig, of course they have to pay because they're not getting malchus. But you, Reish Lakish, hold that chayavei makish shoigigin, even though you're not getting malchus, since it's a sin for which had you done it b'mezid, you would have gotten malchus, you don't pay. And we know from Reish Lakish that not only do you not pay financial restitution, you don't pay knas. Yes, korban, but not knas. That's what the Gemara is saying. Keren is knas, choimish is knas. In other words, the Gemara is saying so gavaldik. Even if you're going to insist for whatever lumdus that choimish is kapara, but the keren for sure is knas. Knas is not paid according to Reish Lakish when you're chayiv malchus, even shoigig. The haraya, he didn't give that answer. Why would he make the Mishnah in Ksubas das yachid Rab Meir when he could have given the right answer? A knas you pay. That's gavaldik. So says the Gemara, Ella Rav Shimon ben Lakish kedaite, kamo du Rav Shimon ben Lakish amar tamon. Just like Reish Lakish says, regarding the ground zero of the machlokes of Rab Meir and the Chachamim, that what? The Chachamim are the ones that hold that you don't Eidim Zoymimim. You don't get both penalties. But I have a simple question, Aviv. What do you get Eidim Zoymimim? Okay, according to Rav Meir, Eidim Zoymimim. Now, first of all, the Torah writes explicitly, whatever they did happens to them. It doesn't only mean money. If they wanted to have someone killed, in certain scenarios, they will be put to death. It's like, wow. If they wanted to get someone malchus, they're going to get malchus. Whatever. Now, sometimes, at the beginning of Masechta Makos, if they testify that a kohen is a ben gerusha, ben chalutza, and the Edom are not even kohanim, what are you going to do to them? They're anyways not kohanim. They get malchus. But if they testified false, and their testimony was obligating someone to pay money, what will happen to them? They have to pay the money. The Torah says, Lo sa'ana b'reyacha 8 sheker, which is a law, for which theoretically, what should you get? Malchus. Rav Meir says you get both. What do the Chachamim say? You don't get both, but what happens? You pay the money. But why do you pay the money? Didn't we not learn already for 2 days that according to Rabbi Yechanan and according to Reish Lakish, number one, cham lei b'derabba minei, using the words in the Yerushalmi, ein aloika umishalim, but when you have to pick and choose, which one do you get? Malchus. So why is it by Edom Zoymimim do they pay money? And the answer is because when the Torah explicitly says that from the two you get the money one, then you give the money one. Unlike other cases from where we say, this is a raya to the whole Torah. Unlike Rab Nosson Bar Oishaya that uses this as a ground zero by Memotzino, Rabbi Yechanan and Ish Lakish, they don't use this as a by Memotzino. They say this is an exception. But even though there are rules have exceptions. And when you have an exception, it's an exception. So just like Reb Shimon ben Lakish will explain over there, that even though Hakoil Hoya Bechlal, any type of false testimony, whether it's about death, whether it's about Malchus, whether it's about money, all of it is also included in the law of Lisana B'Riyacha Eit Shaker, for which you should get Malchus. Rabbi Yechanan Eish Lakish holds that whenever you chayiv Malchus, you'll be exempt from paying money. Nevertheless, Yatzazeh, but when the Torah writes explicitly, Va'asisam loi, that goes to the false testimony, witnesses, Va'asisam loi, Kasher Zomam Lasais La'achiv, in the case where they beard false testimony, which was machayiv and based on someone to pay money, the din is l'chayv imamin. In other words, we have rules, but if the Torah writes that in this case, you're not going to get both. According to the Chachamim, you don't get Malchus and Mammon, you get Mammon. So give the same answer over here. The Torah says that if a person eats, befedish, that's what we were learning, the whole last Pedic. If a person eats kodesh bishgaga, the Torah says they have to pay keren v'chaimish. The Torah says that. In other words, yeah, there is a rule. And this will be an exception. So yes, if you eat it, b'mezit yechayiv malchus. And yes, according to Reish Lakish, therefore, even if you would have eaten it b'shoigeg, theoretically, you're not going to be chayiv any mamain nor any knas. But the Torah says, Yatzav ve'ish ki yoichal kodesh b'shgaga, etc. The Torah says, v'yasav chamishisoi olav. That's it. So l'chayv mamain, gavaldik. Now, hold on. What happens when you eat?
And that would tell you that you have to pay the chaimish as well as the keren, correct?
Yeah. No, the rule is that when you chayiv malchus, even shoigig, you are exempt from knas, which is why Reish Lakish said that the Mishnah in Ksubos is only Rab Meir. And for the record, Reish Lakish said also that the din that we learned in our Pedic, according to Reish Lakish, that if you eat truma b'mezid, what did our Mishnah say? B'mezid. You pay the keren. According to Reish Lakish, according to Rabbi Yechanan, that we learned the Marafulda, our Mishnah is speaking about a case where there was no hasra. But since de facto you're not getting malchus, you got to pay the keren. If you get malchus, according to Rabbi Yechanan, you're not going to pay the keren because of the rule. According to Reish Lakish, you can't say that because according to Reish Lakish, even if you're not getting malchus, you ate it b'mezid, you did a sin for which you chayiv malchus, you should be exempt. Hitaka says that our Mishnah is Rab Meir. The Shlakish says, that's what we learned yesterday or 2 days ago, that our Mishnah only follows Rab Meir. According to the Chachamim, if a person is oichel truma mezid, you know what happens to him, Aviv? If he got all of the hasra, he gets malchus, and if not, he doesn't get malchus, and that's it. And vizehu, and no financial restitution to the kohen. This is great. This closed makis, ksubais, trumais. But now we're still discussing the rule, that if a person does one violation, one act, that's in two or more violations, one of them bears the penalty of malchus, the other one bears the penalty of finances, you don't get both. Now we're going to learn exceptions, and we're going to have to figure out why are they exceptions. Says the Gemara, V'hatani, we learned in a Brais, that Moedim Chachamim Rabbi Meir, again, we said in our intro, just quickly, they are arguing in the case of Edom Zoymimim, where the witnesses testified regarding finances. Rabbi Meir says that Edom Zoymimim get Malchus. Why? From the shame, Loisana Bereyacha, from the Ten Commandments. The third command, no, I'm sorry, the other side, third commandment, right? Loy sirtzach, loy sinaf, the fourth commandment, loy sirtzach, loy signoif, loy sirtzach, loy sinaf, loy signoif, and then loy sana b'reyacha 8 sheker. That's corresponding to Shabbos. That's how it works over there, right? Because Shabbos is a testimony that we are partners with God, and God rested, we rest. Okay, so the Chachamim are moeded to Rav Meir. That what? That there will be cases where you get both malchus and you have to pay money. If a person steals chalev that belongs to his fellow and eats it, the punishment for eating chalev b'mezid is kares. But as we said, sins for which you're chayiv kares, in the human court, as a rule, you'll get malchus. On top of that, they have to pay. Now the question will be why. Now I want to tell you like this, that in the Bavli, as we will also have, according to some, the understanding of the Yerushalmi. But let me just give you 2 different ways of approaching it. The easier way, I'm saying easier because this is what's wrote in the Bavli, and it works. There'll be one exception that will have to be worked out. Is that if the violations don't happen at the same time, then of course you're going to get 2 penalties. So if, as an example, Reuven stole Shimon's chalev. When are you chayiv for Geneva? Before eating it, for the act of stealing. That's mechayiv you money, the act of Geneva. Then you ate it. Since it didn't happen at the same time, you're going to be chayiv both. That will be one way to explain why is this an exception. If this would be the only explanation, Aviv, what would happen in a case where Reuven went into Shimon's house and they stole it by eating it? In other words, if the only reason why you're chayiv twice is because they didn't happen at the same time, if it would happen at the same time, then you would basically be saying, then you won't be loika u'mishalom, you only get malchus. That's not accurate, because there's another reason which we will focus on in the Yerushalmi over here. And that's very important. Now, this is a big chiddush. What's the reason? If one is able, if there is a case where one could be violated without the other, which would mean a person eats his own chalev. The violation of eating chalev could happen without violating Geneva. That makes it so separate that even if someone joined them together, that's a different word. Not because it's not on the same time, which de facto, normally, when you ganve and you eat it, it's not on the same time. But because one is viewed as something completely separated from the other. How do I know that? Because there could be a case where you only violate one without violating the other. By Edom Zoymimim, as an example. By Edom Zoymimim, that the Chachamim hold, they don't get malchus. Eino loika mishalom. Normally loika ve'eino mishalom, but the Torah explicitly writes by the Edom Zoymimim, mishalom ve'eino loika. When you lie about someone owing money, you can never do one sin without the other. What are the 2 sins? You're bearing false testimony. And since it's about finances, you're bringing upon someone a financial obligation that they're not chayiv to pay. You're wronging someone financially. You can never separate one without the other. Masha Enkein over here, since even though you put them together, getting malchus here will not exempt you from payment. See, that nuance is a chiddush. I want to tell you that what I'm saying now is what the Marafulda learns it, that Asher Ilyo wants to make our Bavli, I think, as close to our Yerushalmi, as close to the Bavli. So there's only one case that he cannot learn it that way. But in this case, if you quickly look in the right column, 5 lines from the bottom, the Asher Ilyo will attempt in our whole, we're going to bring, I think, 4 cases. 3 of them, he's gonna say that the Gemara here also means the same thing. Look inside. The malchus mishum chelef. Vafilo didei v'tashlumen. You see, he writes the words mishas geneva. The Asher Ilyo always is putting in over here that it didn't happen at the same time. Almost everyone else is not understanding our Yerushalmi as explaining the exception because it happened at separate times. Even if it were to happen at the same time, since one could be violated without the other, we view them so separate that you're going to be chayiv both penalties. Look at the next case. You're going to see how this develops. Another example, which will be, again, why will it be an exception? V'hatani, moedem chachamim l'Rabbi Meir. Similar. Begoynef trumas chaveiroi v'achala. Someone stole the truma from Edo, and he ate it. Right, that's our pedic. Ha'oichel truma mezid. What is our the chol zar lo yoichel v'chayv malchus? Chayv malchus. Now we're not talking about the financial restitution. We're talking about the act of theft, geneva. You got to pay umishalim. Now you can give the same understanding in the answer that the person violated geneva prior to violating eating. Where did we have this? In the Mishnah. In the last Mishnah of the last Pedic. That what? That if a person steals and eats, the chayv to pay 2 kerens. Answers the Gemara, Shkeno oichel truma loika. Now, Shkeno oichel truma loika, I will say again that look inside the Rashirilio on the left column, 3 lines from the top. V'tashlumin mechayev mishas geneva. Hilkoch le'yava malchus v'tashlumin ka'achas. The Rashirilio is learning our Yerushalmi the way the Gemara in Bavli says it explicitly. Others learn, no, it's not because they didn't happen together. Even if it would have happened together, the fact that one is able to violate eating truma and getting malchus, where there is no geneva involved, in such a type of double violations with one act, you will be chayiv too. Next case. The now, here, you can't learn it as of yet, the way we learn it in the Bavli. Here, we have to understand the Gemara as everyone explains the other 2 shtiklach. It's not about not happening at the same time, but it's about one being able to be independent of the other. And the case is, so I rented someone else's animal. There is a lav that when I use a animal, mine, yours, threshing, unless they're threshing truma or kodesh, unless I'm not allowed to muzzle the animal. Muzzling the animal is the ground zero law from which we learn that if you violate a lav, sheyesh boy maisa, shaloi nitak laase, she'ein boy tashlumin, you're going to be chayiv malchus. Of course, when you had asra and there's witnesses, etc. And outside of that, if I rent your animal, since the animal would have eaten, Chazal say, a cow, a pada, when it's threshing the whole day, I don't know what a whole day meant for that. There's the norm, 6 hours, 8 hours, whatever that norm is, it would eat 6 kav of that food. If I would hire a chamoid, one day it would eat 4 kav. Like, in other words, the Chazal gave the norm of amount of food that an animal would eat while it's threshing. And if I rent your animal to thresh, in other words, aside of me paying you $100 a day, I'm chayiv to give the 6 kav to the cow. You know that when you're giving your animal, it's going to come back with 6 kav of new energy. If I muzzled it, so it didn't die, but it ate up its own flesh, I owe the owner that flesh that it consumed. In other words, I got the tank full and I gave back the tank empty. I have to compensate for the gas. Problem is, you loika umeshalim. Here it happens at the same time. See, here it happens at the same time. It's muzzled while it's threshing. Every moment, I'm not giving it the food, which is why I'm chayiv to pay. Why am I chayiv to pay 6 kav? Because throughout the day, every hour, I'm denying it food that I'm chayiv to give it. How am I denying it? Because it's muzzled. It is ka'achas, l'chu'ura. And here the quantity is 6 kav l'pada v'arbas kavim l'chamoir. Here we go. Here, there's no way, as of yet, to be chayiv, even though here is where the Rashirilio writes that the Bavli and the Yerushalmi have different answers. It's crazy how he writes it over here. And he writes that it's not the Bavli. He quotes in the Gemara. The Gemara Bavli says, when am I chayiv? When am I chayiv? I'm curious now at the civil law by a car rental here. It's time to contrast. When am I chayiv in mezonos? when I rent your animal, and I'm telling you, I'm renting your animal to thresh my stuff or someone else's stuff. And implied in that is not only the amount of rental, but since everyone knows you're not allowed to muzzle the animal, so I'm chayiv to give it. Let's say I'm using a cow for a day threshing. I'm chayiv 6 kav of food when I took the animal away from the owner, when I pulled out of the Hertz car rental. Whenever you're considered responsible for the animal, you're chayiv b'mezonos b'shas meshicha. That's what the Bavli answers. When were you oivel the lav on chasima? Later, when you muzzled it. That's not what the Gemara says right now. At least he's the right now answers the Gemara, because since I violate the lav of muzzling even when it's my cow, if I use my animal to muzzle, I'm not chayiv to me any financial restitution. In other words, since it's a lav that could be violated independent of the chiyuv mammon, even though it happened together, you're still going to be chayiv. You're like, just like we had,
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
If I muzzle the cow, your cow, okay? So if it happened for 30 seconds, I would already be chayiv malchus for muzzling the cow.
Yep.
If I then unmuzzle the cow and let the cow eat for the next 3 hours, whatever my rental is.
I'm going to answer that on Amud Beis. Very good. But that's, by the way, that's the opposite of the Bavli. So it's the Bavli that has one mahalach. If it's not the bas achas, you're chayiv both. And the Gemara, and he quotes, you look at the Rashi, he quotes the words in Perek HaPoyalim, because you're chayiv and mezonos right away. We're going to have here in the Yerushalmi the opposite direction. You're chayiv on the muzzling only b'shas you muzzled it. Laf sheyesh boy maisa. And the Gemara actually holds that for that instant, for whatever the animal didn't eat, at that moment you take a putter to pay. Your putter to pay 6 kav minus the half a penny that it would have eaten at that moment. Not the way the Bavli learns that you're chayving the whole 6 kav when you rent it.
So that makes them separate, basically.
You're separate, yeah. Yes.
So you're not actually being chayiv 2 things for the same thing. They're independent of each other
at different times. But it's just interesting. Like when I rent a car, when am I chayiv in the fuel? I think when you return it. That's the way the Yerushalmi. I'm not chayiv mezonos right away. When I return it, it has to have in its tank another 6 kav of food. Anyways, gavaldik. Now, the fourth case, Amar Rabbi Yosi, an exception where even the Chachamim Amoida to Rab Meir, everyone will agree that you're like u'mishalem, shekain, the mechiyove misois. We're speaking about someone who violated the sin for which the chayiv misa b'dei shamayim, and we already made it clear that misa b'dei shamayim or kares doesn't exempt you from Yechayiv Misa, Yechayiv Kares, and Yechayiv Malchus. But hold on, in cases where Yechayiv Misa b'dei shamayim, the last maraf full the daf samach dalad amid beis. Like an example, Gonaf Trumas Hegdish V'Achala. We had this case right again at the end of the previous chapter when the Mishnah gave a case, at least according to Kahana, where you only chayiv 1 keren, and to Chaimish, a person stole Trumas Hegdish and they ate it. But here we're speaking about someone who ate it b'mezid. The previous chapter, we learned about someone who ate it b'shoigeg. It makes a big difference because there you chayiv choimish. Now, another just nuance over here, not so negaya, but just to know, Rabbi is the one who holds that me'ilah, even b'mezid, is machayiv yu misa b'dei shamayim. Just to know that. Not everyone agrees to that because many understand that me'ilah, the word me'ilah, and all of the penalties of me'ilah is only if it was done inadvertently. Stam to know, I'm just saying that, but we are beginning with Shechen Chayave Misois, Misa B'dei Shamayim. When he speaks about Loika here means you ate it b'mezid. Stam, Rebbe holds, it's fine. It's still called Me'ilah, means you Chay Misa B'dei Shamayim. On top of that, we don't care about that part. But we're just following that opinion, that you're both Loika. We didn't have this in the last chapter. Last chapter was someone who ate Trumas Hegdish B'shoigeg. You're Chayiv 1 keren and 2 chaimishes. Here we're learning about someone who stole Trumas Hegdish and ate it b'mezid. Everyone will agree that you're both chayiv malchus, and you have to pay. What do you have to pay for, Aviv? What's the rule of eating? You have to pay the mammon. So how can that be? Look inside the top Look inside the maraful, the second line from the top. Loiko mishalim, the havale nami shnei devarim. Now, just to know, what are you getting malchus for? It's important that there's no malchus for eating hegdish. Malchus for truma, because if you would get malchus, even according to Rabbi, bemezit, if you would get that, why do we have to speak about ganaf trumas hegdish? Just to know the mitzias. So yechayev malchus for eating truma bemezit. That's our payday. Oichel truma mezit. Oichel truma mezit. The Mishnah says you have to pay money, but we know v'chol zar lo yerchal boy and misa, because you were moyel l'Rebbe even bemezit dechai misa b'dei shomayim. We'll put that on the side. And v'tashlumin, to whom? Whom did you steal it from? You didn't steal it from a kohen. The kohen was magdash to the Beis Hamikdash. V'tashlumim lahegdish. And this is also a rule that even the Rabbanan are moide to Rab Meir, that you'll be loike umishalim. And why would that be? So answers the Gemara, Mikol Makoim Hifsid Mamain. Mikol Makoim Hiv was meant Mikol Makoim Hifsid Mamain. Look inside the Rashirilio, the right column, 3 lines from the top. Umishani. Mikol Makoim Hifsid Mamain, 4th line from the top. The Afal Gav, the Loy Mechayev Kefal Hegdish. Mishum Geneva. Because there's a rule that the whole penalty of Kefal is only Lirei Eyo. But since Mikol Makoim Mafsid Maminu, you stole from Hegdish, the Keren Chayev. Here clearly, again, the Rashirilio is saying, Hilkoch Tashlumin Rami Aleo Mishara Shoina Shal Geneva. The moment you stole it, the moment you removed it from the property, let's say of the temple treasurer, you're Chayev Mamain. Different times. When are you Chayev Malkis? Only from when you ate it. And I'm going to go with that. And therefore, you're loikel mishalim, because you're mishalim for something that you did 10 o'clock. Your malchus for what you did 10:01. It's two different times, even though it was with the same thing. It wasn't at the same time. It wasn't the basach. Okay. Now, I know we got ahead of ourselves. Other than in the case of choisam parasoi shal chaveroi, other than in that case, it's easy to say that they didn't happen at the same time. Easy, which is what the Bavli says, which is the way that Asherilio learned the whole sugya here as well. By choisem parasoi shal chaveroi, at least in the Havamina, here even the Asherilio holds the Yerushalmi introduces something new. The Bavli says, no, you're chayiv v'mezoinus when you rented the animal, way before you threshed, different times. The Bavli doesn't say that, according to everyone. The current understanding is this new chiddush that we have in the Yerushalmi, that the Marafulda learns in the whole thing, that you, even though you did it at the same time, if you are able to violate one without the other, even though you happen to violate both of them together, you got to get both penalties. Loika u'mishalim. Frag the Gemara, Omar Rav Mana. If that's true, and we're using the example of choisam parasoi, that you got to pay because I'm chayiv malkis if it would not have been my fellow. Meyato habo ala choisoi kitano. If a person, God forbid, has a relation, and that's called an act of violation, halachically, with a minor, with a sister, both he should get malkis. For what? For the love of cohabiting with sister, and he should have to pay the boishes and the pegam, even though the knas we already mentioned yesterday, bekitzer, is only by anara, but that's only the knas. There are other financial restitutions that have to be made when a person is ma'anes another, which is the same by a minor. She also shares boishes. She also has pegam deappreciation. Now, you're going to answer, no, you can't do that because it's not true. If the woman would have been, if the sister would have been halachically an adult, in the case where she acquiesced, we just learned that yesterday, so therefore there's no tzar, right? When a woman consents when she was being seduced, in that consent, she first going any financial obligation. She went along with consent. So now we say, you're for achoisoi, you'll never pay. Why not? If it's possible to have a scenario where you can violate the law of achoisoi and get malchus by itself, then even in a case where in a top of the malchus there's a chiyuv of mammon, you should have to pay both. And by the way, kasha is both according to Reish Lakish and according to Rabbi Yechanan. And you know what the actual halacha is? That if a person, God forbid, has a relation which is called an act of rape with a minor sister, you're only chayiv malchus. You're not chayiv mammon because of the rule. Eino loiko mishalem. How is it different than achoisem parasai? That's the kasha. And by the fact that by habal achoisai aktana, you're only chayiv malchus, we are refuting. The Gemara in the Yerushalmi is rejecting this logic that if you are able to violate one without the other, even in the case where they came together, you'll be chayav both. We're rejecting it. And the only thing that's going to stand is, you know when you're going to get both when they did not happen at the same time, which is very easy. If it didn't happen at the same time, even though it happened with the same item or with the same person, it didn't happen at the same time. Habal achoisai, it's the same time. So now we're going to have to explain the achoisem parasai. So Rachaz Rav Mana v'Amar, Tamon, over here, if a person, God forbid, is bal achoisai kitana, since the act that's mechayiv malchus, which is the act of cohabitation, the act for which you're chayiv mammon, which is the act of cohabitation, happened at the same time, ka'achas, therefore, no one says, Eino loiko mishalem. Again, according, I'm not talking about Nasan Bar Rishaya. According to Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish, you're loike ve'ena mishalem. But over here, by the muzzling, here we go. Ma'chasima reshayma nischayiv malchus. When are you chayiv malchus? When you put the muzzle on the mouth of the animal. And at that point, even if you muzzled the animal over the food, and even if the animal, had it not been muzzled at that moment, would have eaten a gram of food, for that, you're not chayiv to pay. But after you muzzled, you're not actively muzzling. It's already muzzled. You're not violating the lav according to our Gemara every moment. You can debate that. The lav is only violated the first moment. The obligation to pay is throughout the day. Every time the animal would have taken another bite and you're not allowing the animal to do it, now you're chayav for that bite. Then you're not even on the lav. That's the answer we have over here. And again, it's the opposite of what we have in the Bavli. It's the same principle, but in the Bavli, it's because you're chayiv in all of the mezoynes b'shas mashicha. Later, in other words, you're chayiv mammon before you chayiv malchus. Here it's the opposite. Here we're saying you chayiv malchus right away, and then you are exempt, but throughout the rest of the day, you chayiv mammon. Let's go quickly. If a person burns down a fellow's haystack on Shabbos, what's the din, Aviv? What's the din of making a fire on Shabbos? Death. No, death. If you did it, the mesa.
Misa.
And you have to make. So the din is you don't make financial restitution. Why don't you make financial restitution? Everyone agrees to turn on the vechizkia. Even if you were not forewarned and you're not going to get the actual death, since it's a sin for which you're chayiv misa. Hold on. When are you chayiv death? When you made the fire. So when I made the fire, I burned to one straw. Maybe for that I should be exempt. But then when the whole pile burned, at that moment I'm not making the fire actively. Why don't we say the same logic? Why don't we say mishaboilus rishayna I'm chayiv to death, and for the shaboilus rishayna I should be exempt from payment? But mikan ve'elach l'tashlumin. But that's not the din. V'leis at amarachin. But no one says that. What do we say? We say over there, al kol shiboilus v'shiboilish yes bo hasroyas misa v'hasroyas tashlumim. Even though your act was only in the beginning, but we don't view it that way. We view the fact that the fire is burning ishay mishum chitzai, right? That's a whole big sugya that's connected to this. But we view you as constantly burning on Shabbos while you're chayiv mammon. So the same thing should be by muzzling. I did an act, even though my act took a moment, but as long as the muzzle is on, we should view it as I'm always in violation of. So why don't we say, Ufachi also al kol chasima v'chasima yesh ba'asrois markas v'asrois tashlumin. We look that each stalk that's burning is a stalk for which I'm chayiv misa. Same thing over here. Each bit of threshing, I should be chayiv malchus. And the Gemara says, you're right. But the case where we learned that everyone is maida, that choisem parasa, you chayiv both, is a unique case. And we're going to find a couple of unique cases. Let's get in a little bit. I'll tell you, there are two Amirayim that limit, you're right, normally you won't be chayiv because they come together. But Chad Omar, when you have to pay both, only b'choisem b'truma b'mikdashim. So this is the case. Case number one, Aviv, like we mentioned, when I'm not allowed to muzzle an animal, only when it's threshing chulin. When it's threshing truma or hegdish, and it's not that I have to muzzle it, I'm allowed to muzzle it. So just to give you the case was I rented an animal, and you have to add a nuance. I first used my animal to thresh chulin. And when my animal was threshing chulin, at that moment, I'm chayiv malchus, and I'm not chayiv mammon. And then the animal already muzzled was moved on to the next pile of grain, which belonged to truma. And your person, like we said, you could be magdim truma even before the time of chiyuv, even though it wasn't threshed yet. Normally you do it after it was threshed. That would be the case. It's amazing. That's one way of reconciling it, and I don't mind stopping in the middle because we'll review it. In other words, that makes sense. In that case, you know why you chayiv mamain, because in the goyden of hegdish or truma, you're not violating a lav. That's the only time that you'll be like o mishalem. And we'll give another way of limiting and explaining why we have an exception. Bottom line,
according to this answer, in a regular case, you would never have both? With the threshing and the muzzling?
Beautiful. You would never have brosh. In other words, even though the act of the lav, just like the act of the Shabbos violation, happens in a moment, but if something extends from it, we view the violation of Misa by Shabbos to be active throughout it burning up the haystack. I won't have to pay for any of the haystack. We view that my lav of muzzling that I initiated through an action is a violation that I am doing every moment it's threshing. This is a great sugya. And I'll be exempt of mammon. Period. And it's amazing that the Bavli says you're chayiv mammon b'shas mishicha of the animal. So that's a much simpler solution.